Where do you want to wander?
I don't mind. I don't mind. So how long have you lived here?
Yeah, I've lived here 3 years. I've lived in Highbury for more than 20 years.
Uh-huh.
What about you?
We've been down, well, we're just down the bottom of Elford Road there. So we've been there for about, seems like a few years, but in fact when I worked here the other day it's 8. And then before that we were living in my wife's parents' house over off Lloyd Square, and then before that we were down in De Beauvoir. So yeah, we're pretty much, she was born over in, it's the house she grew up in over in Lloyd Square. So she's been around this area all her life. I moved to London when I was 20, so.
So tell me where you were before London then.
Well, I grew up in Wiltshire.
In Wiltshire?
Yeah. My parents run a business down there. I grew up down there. Went away to school for a while, came back, hung around there for a while. Formed a band when I was at school. You know, that kind of petered out.
What was the nature of your band?
We aspired to be sort of crossed between Thin Lizzy and Def Leppard, who were just beginning at that point.
What era are we talking about here?
1978.
1978?
79. Probably would have started the band in 79.
You don't seem old enough to have been doing that.
Weirdly enough, my partner in crime, Nick, who I formed the band with, just phoned before I left. He kind of stayed in the music business, formed another band, had a modicum of success, but got stymied by label shenanigans.
Yeah.
And then started a merch business called CID.
Oh, I know CID, yeah.
So he owned CID.
No way.
And
we worked with them.
And then he kind of sold CID because it was a question of big fish eating, he was a small fish.
Yeah.
So he sold out to one of them, and they made such a cock up of running the business, he ended up kind of buying it back and then sold a stake to this American entrepreneur called Joel Weinshanker or something, who is one of these guys who makes all his money from licensing trademarks, I guess. You know, he started off licensing the rights to make action figures.
Okay.
And then moved into music. Anyway, we hook up. He's in another band these days, but just for fun. Although he'd like to kind of make it a bit more serious. But they were supporting Steel Panther the other day down in Brixton, so I caught up with him there. You know,
have you stayed connected to music yourself?
Peripherally. I got kind of fed up playing kind of heavy rock and just, I don't know, just didn't really know what I wanted to do, and then I ended up drifting into a career in photography, and then somewhat ironically ended up shooting rock bands for the rock press for quite a few years, sort of travelling about, and didn't play very much, and then kind of took up playing again when I was, I don't know, 30 or something, and yeah, I've just been in various other bands ever since.
You play guitar?
Yeah. And you know, there's that thing. I was at a gig the other night, the Peter Green tribute concert over the Palladium.
Okay.
Because my brother-in-law runs all Lloyd Webber's business, so he had passes, and there was a whole row of seats empty at row 4 for VIPs and who hadn't turned up. So Mark, my brother-in-law, said, "Oh, you can go down and sit there if you want." And I walked down there, and there was a photographer there.
Yeah.
And I went to say, "Excuse me, mate, can I?" And it's like, bloody hell, it's Ross Halford. It's like, you know, great rock photographer who I know well from years ago. I hadn't seen him for 12 years or something. So that was nice. So we caught up with him. So there's a little sort of pang of nostalgia there. And then I thought, you know what? Actually, no. I love doing it, but I'm not sorry that I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
Not least because there was always a part of me that wanted to be the person I was photographing.
Yeah, of course. That's really interesting. Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. I manage bands, but I've never been a musician. You know.
I think that's a good position to be in.
It does. No, I agree. It is a good position to be in the sense that I can't I'm never going to sort of challenge their position. I'm never going to do what they do.
Yeah.
But it's still complex in the sense that I'm a really creative person.
So how does that creativity normally manifest? I mean,
Well,
are
with
you
my
visually creative?
Yeah,
or
with my clients, it's that sort of stuff.
getting involved in album design, covers, and all sort of
Yeah.
stage.
I'm a sounding board for the music as well.
Yeah. Well, that's good, because you need a kind of fresh pair of ears quite a lot of the time on these things.
Yeah, totally.
Because you get so stuck into it that you can't hear anything anymore because you've sort of gone snowblind.
I think it can be
mixing
good.
metaphors, but you know what I mean.
I think the thing I've been thinking about at this sort of stage in my career is that I put a lot of myself into it. Like my sort of heart is in it with my clients' work, and that can be really hard for me. That I sort of put a bit too much of myself in it, if you know what I mean. So I've been thinking about how do I sort of make a contribution but without feeling that it's like me, too much of me.
Yeah, it's weird that, because I mean I've come across various managers over the years, but you know, there are different structures, aren't there? And I think, wasn't Paul McGuinness effectively a fifth member of U2 with a straight 20% split?
Yeah.
And that always seemed to be quite a brave way of doing it for the band, or maybe not, but it's certainly.
Well, that's how it is with my artists. It's just.
Is it?
But yeah. But I think there's something very seductive, but also unrealistic about the idea that you're the fifth member of the band.
Well,
I think it's really important to resist that.
Yeah.
That
I noticed when I was working with bands, you know, there's always that. It was like concentric circles of influence.
Yeah.
And it was great to be invited in
Yeah.
to one of those inner circles.
Yeah.
But you had to never forget or lose sight of the fact that you were never going to be a member of the band.
That's right.
And the reason I like being in bands, and I think the reason why people find them so attractive, is because they're like the closest knit family you ever met.
Yeah. Yeah.
But without actually being a family.
It's such a gang, yeah.
It's a complete gang.
Well, the manager's challenge is to sort of be part of that gang, but without investing too much emotionally, because you will at some point get burnt, because you're not actually in the gang.
No, and I guess you also have to be able to step out and read them the riot act.
That's the other thing, yeah, you've got to have some objectivity, some perspective. You know, you can't be so caught up in it. I think one of the really interesting things that a manager can do is say, I'm the kind of manager that follows my artist's creativity, right? I'm not going to say to them, this is the kind of record I think you should make. I say, okay, what have we got here? And then I say, you know, do what the muse, you know, tells you to do. But then I think the manager's job is to say, okay, it's this kind of record that you've made. You know, the business around this record will be something like this, to try and make it realistic.
Yeah.
So I think where a lot of artists go wrong is they assume that their sort of left field art record, which they think is the best work they've ever done, will be the thing that, you know, explodes them into a mass popularity.
Yes.
And it really
it's usually
won't.
the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah. It's
I mean,
like,
how have
it's
you
good
had to
do.
navigate the shift? How long have you been doing this? Quite a while.
20-some years, yeah.
Okay, so you've had to kind of navigate that shift in artists earning money from record sales to artists earning virtually nothing from record sales and earning money from touring.
Yeah. I mean,
Is that
it's not totally true that artists don't earn anything from record sales. I think that's a bit of a kind of industry myth, that.
Right.
It's not terrible.
Yeah.
It's better than piracy, which was zero.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. It's I mean, it's such an interesting time now, because obviously no one can tour.
Yeah.
No one's going to be able to tour, I don't think, for quite a while. So it'll be really intriguing to see how the live business resets itself.
Yeah.
I'm sort of this slightly unpopular voice that's been saying for a while that artists and agents have basically been like pushing their value too high for the last few years, and the consumer has suffered in high inflated ticket prices, and actually, you know, the whole business just needs to be a bit smaller. I think. You know, it's like applying, you know, the idea of completely free growth, you know, pure capitalism, to something like live music. It just doesn't really work because, you know, the audience is finite.
Yeah, although it always amazed me that you know, artists would carry on choosing to play the O2 instead of doing 4 nights at the Hammersmith Odeon or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And people.
Why did you? What
well, not because obviously the financial logistics of that make perfect sense. You're going to make a ton more money. But what amazed me was that people would go and see them at the O2, which I thought was a kind of pointless experience.
Right.
Having been there twice, I swore never to go again.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And particularly paying, and then you get this weird mechanism where if you've had to pay 150 or 175 quid for your ticket, it's got to be really bad an experience for you to admit to yourself that you just wasted the money.
True.
So the more you spend, the more you're determined to have a good time. And I see this weird sort of behaviour where
it's unrealistic.
People are going to have a good time, whether it's actually good or not.
Who did you see?
I used to live, when we were in just off Lloyd Square, one of our neighbours was a chap called Michael Wolff, who is a legendary sort of graphic designer.
Right.
Ran a company called Wolff Olins, who was very famous in that world.
Yeah.
And Michael's 80 something now, but he's a very cool guy. And I came home from work one day, and he was standing in the road, and he said, "Oh, how are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm good." Yeah. He said, "What are you doing tonight?" I went, "Well, nothing really. Why?" He said, "Do you want to come and see Pink Floyd?" I was going, "What?" I'm not sure, they're still touring, Michael. He went, no, it's the, what's his name, the shouty one. So he'd got a spare ticket for Roger Waters.
Yeah.
So I went down to see that, and I was kind of shocked that how many people are in the O2? 35,000, is it?
No, it's more like somewhere between 15 and 18,000.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
That at any time, about 5,000 of those people seem to be on the move, talking to each other, going to get a beer, going for a piss, paying absolutely no attention to what was going on stage.
Totally.
And then I had a friend whose company had a box at the back, and they invited us down there to go and see Neil Young with Crazy Horse.
Right.
And I mean, it's a terrible place to watch it from. It was a terrible show. I love some things about Neil Young, but that particular bit of his work, you know, he was on there playing a really shit guitar solo for about 14 minutes or something,
Jesus.
and you think, shit, you know. I remember going to see The Clash in 1978, when all this stuff was supposed to be kicked out and buried. And they're gone, and he's still there. And I left halfway. I thought it was really tedious.
I don't know if this is a true story, but I heard that Lindsey Buckingham eventually now has finally sort of fully been kicked out of Fleetwood Mac.
Yes.
Because he insisted on having, you know, contractually he had to have like 3 6-minute guitar solos in the show kind of thing.
Yeah.
And people were finally like, nah.
It's interesting that because the guitar players are the worst offenders, because virtually no one will tolerate a bass solo or even a drum solo these days. But guitarists seem to think that it's acceptable.
Well, I've often felt like I've managed some solo artists, and a real issue for solo artists is band members overplaying.
Yeah.
It's just such a problem, because once you have them with you on the roads, you've got sort of two things going on. One, it's like, well, I'm paying them, so they might as well play on all of the songs.
Yeah.
And then you've got this other thing, which is, you know, oh, I don't want to make them not play. That's really mean.
So how did you get into managing bands? Because that always seems like one of those things that people start doing when they're at school.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting because there was a band I worked with quite closely in the back end of the 80s, 90s called Thunder, who were a sort of British rock band.
Yeah.
Who initially were managed by someone who was an old school friend.
Right.
And then as they grew in stature, his limitations as a manager suddenly became apparent.
Yeah.
Because he hadn't got the kind of experience that was required.
Totally.
And then you end up with a real dilemma between basically carrying on, risking your career, or sacking your mate.
Did you get to the point of having a manager of yours?
No, we were never that significant. I did a job with them when they opened at the Monsters of Rock in 90.
Thunder.
Yeah. And I was kind of working for EMI with them, spending the whole weekend with them. So we went up the night before, did the sound check, empty field, nice pictures. And then on the day of the gig, we set off after breakfast, straight into the most monumental traffic jam. And they're meant to be going on at midday.
Oh man.
And then suddenly I'm ahead of them. And they're in the limo. And I see this police motorcycle convoy coming up the road on the outside. And then they go past and I see it's their car, and I'm thinking, shit, I'm supposed to be them. So I just whizzed out, tagged on the back. Anyway, we got motorcycle and convoy all the way there, got in.
That's awesome.
And then later on I had this tour manager called Roger Searle.
Oh yeah.
And I asked him, I said, how the hell do you organise something like that? And he said, well, that's what I do, Doing a gig like this, you have the phone numbers of the police.
Yeah.
And you make a call and it happens. And I thought, that is so cool. There's somebody, despite all the kind of rock and roll, everyone being very cool and nonchalant, actually there are people behind the scenes who just know how to do stuff like that.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, it's an insane job being a tour manager, I think. You sort of last to bed, first awake.
Yeah.
And constantly artists are different obviously, but they all seem to have certain things in common with each other. And one of them is, in a sense, I don't mean this in too critical a way, but in a sense they sort of give up responsibility for themselves quite a lot.
Yeah.
And they sort of dedicate themselves to their art and putting on good shows, and obviously there is a bad version of that where it just becomes hedonistic and ridiculous, but there's a good version of it too, which is like really caring about the music and wanting to put on a good show and stuff.
It's quite easy life in a way though, isn't it? I remember that from doing a little bit of touring with Thunder, in a way that you just very quickly forget what day it is or where you are, which is why they always had the city name in big letters across the top of the monitor, because you don't want to go hello Sheffield or to Manchester, just as a mob. And it just everything was done for you. You got up,
taken care of,
got in the bus, you were sort of fed and watered and hoteled, and it was odd.
Yeah, well we certainly have lent on really great tour managers over the years to work with our acts. A guy called Colin Davis they're always Scottish as well, for some reason. Colin Davis from Dundee did Keane for many years, and then now he does Mumford & Sons.
Yeah.
And we really lean on him to just make all of the logistics smooth. You
were about to tell me before I interrupted you, probably, how you started off getting into it.
It's I was a friend of the band. We met at university.
Okay.
They had been Keane had been a school band.
Yeah.
They went to Tunbridge, private school.
Yeah.
And they'd been mates there. They were called the Browns, and then they were called the Lotus Eaters. And then I was at university doing classics at UCL, and literally the first day of arriving there, I met this guy Tim, who turned out to be, an incredibly successful songwriter and band member of Keane. But it took a long time to get there. It was a good, solid 5 years of gigging and writing. And
Who did you learn
getting
your
nowhere.
tricks of the trade from?
I think I was pretty open to the idea that I didn't know everything. So I didn't pretend to know everything, which meant that I learned quicker. And that is definitely a piece of advice that I give to young managers now, is don't try and pretend that you know everything, because it's definitely going to catch you up.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help your artist, doesn't help you. If your artist asks you something you don't know the answer to, the very best thing you can do is say, I'm not sure, but I'll find out,
Yeah.
you know, rather
Yeah.
than like pretend that you know.
I think also that's the kind of behaviour that endears you to people at the same time, because it makes you slightly vulnerable.
It can do, yeah. I mean, obviously a lot of people, I mean, I think artists are often also looking for like strong reassurance. So but I agree, I think that kind of vulnerable strength is more powerful than the kind of like, yeah, I know what to do here,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
which is just a bit of a load of rubbish. So that helped. But yeah, don't know, just a lot of determination, I guess. And I could so easily have been the person that you described that didn't make it, you know. But
Well, there were,
but somehow I learned. And
many are called and few are chosen in that business,
yeah,
whatever your
it's true.
role within it.
It's true.
But so did the classics degree bite the dust, or did you persist?
I finished it, yeah.
Oh, well done.
Finished it. Don't know really
Sure, it's been
why.
incredibly useful to you.
I love the classics, but you know, yeah, not specifically useful. So what was the turn that happened that got you from music to photography? Were there any steps along the way, or did you go straight from
well,
one
it's
to the
something
other?
I was interested in anyway. I mean, I'd always been keen on photography since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then my father had a friend who he'd been at school with, and then they'd both gone on to be engineers, and then he'd gone on, this friend of his, Tony, had gone on to be quite a very successful documentary photographer through the 60s and 70s, like 50 covers on the Telegraph magazine, and
Wow.
travelled all over the planet. He then,
Have you done that sort of editorial stuff?
yeah.
Enjoy that.
Yeah, I mean, these days it doesn't really exist in the same way. So, you know, I've also travelled and shot in about 50-something different countries, but these days all the magazine clients I used to have have virtually disappeared.
Yeah.
So it's changed. But anyway, Tony went back to his original passion, which was engineering, and in particular, he'd spent a lot of time in Africa, and he developed an idea for a car that could be made and used in Africa, substantially made of plywood, like a speedboat.
Okay.
And then he developed a prototype, brought it down to show my father, who'd done some suspension work for him. And I said, well, can I come down and watch? I had a sort of part-time job in the wine trade. Went up to watch them testing it on Salisbury Plain, and Tony gave me a bag full of cameras and said, well, he was filming it. He said, well, if you fancy yourself as a photographer, you know, fire away.
Yeah.
And I shot a couple of rolls of film. And he phoned me up a week and a half later and said, do you want a job? And I became his kind of man Friday. I did everything, travelled everywhere. And then this whole project turned into a kind of 5-hour documentary for Channel 4 about the history of transport around the world.
Amazing.
And we did this we built 3 of these prototypes in Leicestershire, and then drove them up to the Arctic Circle, and then turned around, drove back through Europe and across Africa and across the Sahara Desert, and ended up in Kenya.
Incredible.
And where I also, you know, on that trip is where I met my wife.
Oh, really?
So I have a lot to be thankful for meeting him.
It's such an entrepreneur's thing to sort of spot some promise in someone young and just give them a job.
I think it's a lovely thing to do. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
my wife
amazing.
is a film and TV producer,
Right.
and she started off with a kind of part-time job. First of all, she worked for a guy called Joe Boyd,
Oh, yeah.
so a legendary music
Yeah.
producer.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Joe Boyd did things like the Incredible String Band, Nick Drake,
Right. Oh, yeah.
turned
Great.
turned down Pink Floyd,
Yeah.
did Roy Harper, various things like that.
Yeah.
Then she worked at the British Film Institute, which was run, it had a production division in those days in Rathbone Place. And it was run by a guy called Colin McCabe, who'd been quite a significant character when he was a professor of English at Strathclyde and got into all sorts of difficulties. But he was
That's interesting.
well, he was rather controversial.
Okay.
Back to yours or back?
Should we take the long way around?
Yeah.
Go via the stadium.
And anyway, he ended up as head of production there. They made art house films,
Yeah.
so they made Derek Jarman's first movies
Okay.
and things. Andrew Cotting's, various people like that. But the thing that he was very good at was giving young people who worked for him a chance
Yeah.
to, he'd just give them that leg up to just somewhere they were felt a bit uncomfortable with. It's like, oh, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. You'll be fine,
Yeah.
you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of ex-Colin alumni who I think all owe their first steps in the industry to him just going, yeah, go on.
That's brilliant.
So I think it's a really cool thing to do. I've never really had the opportunity to do it, so I don't really have anyone working for me. So
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I like to do that. I mean, I don't have many employees. I've got 10 that I've had, various over the years. I'm very loyal to people, but it's only recently that I've started to realise that I'm sometimes not critical enough of them. I'm sort of afraid of that confrontation.
oh yeah,
And also another thing is that not everybody has that spirit that you must have had when he saw, when Tony saw you, or some people don't actually have that kind of proactivity about them. And it doesn't mean that they're not valuable in some other way, but some people just kind of want to be told what to do.
yeah.
And I've started to understand, that. I sort of assumed everyone would be like me, like give someone an opportunity, great.
I
grab
think
it.
that's one of the
on.
great problems for the whole kind of work structure, isn't it? Is that you not only assume that everyone's like you, but you
Yeah.
also tend to actively promote people who you think are like you. It's one of the sort of things that perpetuates the hierarchy of middle-aged, middle-class, privately educated white men, because they relate
Yeah.
best to young, privately educated,
Yes.
middle-class white young men,
I think that's very
because
true.
they see a kind of reflection of themselves,
Very true.
just with better hair.
Yeah.
I think, yes, you're my man.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I'm sort of a badge of pride for me is that I don't know what any of my employees got for GCSEs or A levels or degrees.
Yeah.
Apart from that, I know that at least 2 of them didn't even do A levels. I don't think.
No, it's overrated.
Yeah. I've really been thinking about that a lot. My older boy is 13.
I was just coming to that. I was going to
Yeah.
ask you whether you were rattling around in that big house on your own.
Yeah. My older boy's 13 and he's been doing some little bits of work for us because he wants to earn some money to buy a computer.
Yeah.
And, something about learning, starting to do some little bits of work when you're kind of that age, nothing exploitative obviously. But
Oh, no, I
just-
think it's great.
But then I think to myself, why is it that there's this sort of cut-off moment where it's like, right, you're no longer a learner, you're now a worker? To me, it should be more blended. I think we should be able to learn
Yeah.
our whole lives. I
Yeah.
don't know.
But I guess, prior to World War II, you left school and the next day you were an adult
Yeah,
working.
that's true.
If
It's
you-
true. But it's such an old idea. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we could have moved on a bit by now.
Things move on rather more slowly than we'd wish.
Do you have kids?
Yeah, I got 3. My eldest son works in finance and lives in Dubai,
Okay.
but not forever. The younger one,
Do you wish he'd come back?
he will come back. It's only a temporary thing.
Right.
He'll be back in a year or so, I think.
Okay.
My younger son,
Right now, I would find that so heartbreaking. I think, but
well,
I guess they have to do what they got to do, right?
and even if he wanted to come back tomorrow, I don't think there's the option.
Of course, yeah.
My youngest son does kind of digital marketing stuff, but he's always been on his own terms and left school, didn't go to uni, started working. Very, very organised, very self-motivated. And then we've got my daughter Hero, who's at home.
Hero.
Hero.
Hero. That's cool.
So she left uni last year. So she's locked down with us.
How's she finding that?
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's all pretty good. Yeah. She's the kind of creative one. She's doing a bit of more of art, illustration, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And you've got a 13-year-old.
A 13-year-old and a 9-year-old.
Okay.
Noah and Solomon. Solly. Yeah.
So where do they go to school?
Solly goes to Canterbury Primary School.
Yeah, which is where Hero went.
Oh, okay, cool. And Noah went there too.
Yeah.
Noah now goes to Forest.
The one out northeast.
Walthamstow.
Yeah.
Yeah, he seems to be digging that.
Good.
We just got a note from the headmaster today saying they've sort of listened to the feedback and they're going to stop homework from Monday.
Oh.
So like just have a kind of school day till 4, but then nothing else.
Okay.
Which is very sensible.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing they can only do in schools with a degree of autonomy.
Yeah, true. Hey, would you be up for? I've been doing a sort of series of photos outside our house.
Yeah. Good job I had a shave. I haven't really been bothering too much.